Hey there, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us for the final Innovators Hour with the Modern Government Leaders Cohort. I am, as always, Cole van Glaan. I'm a consultant with the Partnership for Public Service. For those of you who haven't joined us previously or aren't familiar with the partnership's work, for over 20 years, the nonpartisan, nonprofit Partnership for Public Service has worked towards a better government and a stronger democracy by supporting federal workforce development, public service leadership, and society's commitment to government. To achieve some of those goals, we put together this program called Modern Government Leaders, along with our partners at Microsoft, where we brought together a cohort of innovative experts to talk about how they've been doing this work in the senior executive service, share their best practices with one another, and sort of try to break down some of those silos to make it easier for innovation to continue delivering better services to the American people and our allies. And today, I'm joined by the final three members of the cohort that will be speaking with y'all. I'm so excited to be wrapping this up with this team. I do just want to say before I introduce them that the views that they're sharing today are not necessarily those of their agencies. These are from their personal experiences developing and running these programs for the federal government. But I know they're all very excited, so I don't want to take any more time with my blather. I'd like to first introduce Kara Rose, Director of Workplace and Collaboration Services at NASA. Eric Stein, Deputy Director of Management, Strategy and Solutions at the Department of State. And Janice Coughlin-Piester, the Chief Financial Officer for the Office of Budget, Finance, and Award Management at NSF. Team, we're going to get started with our first and most general question, which is, what is the story that you're here to tell us today? And I'd love to start in the same sort of alphabetical by first name order. So Kara, would you mind kicking us off with what you worked on?
Yes, absolutely. So Cole, thank you so much for having me, for putting this program together. I am at NASA now, but when I started the program, I was at the Social Security Administration. I worked there for almost 21 years. And one of the biggest challenges at SSA is really the high customer demand and the lowest employee count in history. So lowest staff in 25 years, highest demand. The national 800 number gets over 80 million phone calls a year, which you can imagine leads to some customer service challenges. And one of the things that I discussed with the head of the 800 number was, what could we do without getting more money and without getting more people to provide better service? Because I think we're all impacted. We all know someone who's called SSA and been super frustrated with the long wait times, the polite disconnects, which is the industry term for being hung up on. So I'm not sure how that's polite, but we'll go with it. So what we wanted to do was figure out really why people were calling so that we could take some actions to improve that customer service. With 80 million phone calls a year, we have a lot of data saved because we record those calls for training purposes, for other reasons. But we decided, hey, we have this data sitting here. What can we do with it to really figure it out? So at the time, I was leading some of our data scientists. So I turned to them and said, hey, here's the challenge. We have all of this data. Can we figure out why people are calling us, kind of those key themes, so that we could take some actions to improve? This was the first time that we used generative AI at SSA, and I would call it a resounding success. We summarized those call transcripts into 3 sentences or less to figure out the main reasons why people were calling. We did all of this in 2 months. So we took all of this data that people just weren't able to read through and come up with themes. And in 2 months from start to finish, mine that data, those 3 sentences or less. We added sentiment analysis, so we would know if people were happy, not happy, a lot of not happy, and just rank the top reasons why people called. Once we knew why people were calling, then we could implement some changes to improve customer service. So one of the things that we did was worked with the Center for Medicaid and Medicare Services to remove our phone number from those CMS notices. We get about 400,000 calls a year at SSA that SSA can't handle, only CMS can. By just removing that phone number, we can save 400,000 phone calls of disappointed people who finally get through and we can't help them. One of the other things we did was make some changes to that upfront recording that you hear, the IVR, to say, hey, if you're calling about this, we wouldn't be able to help you. You'll have to go into a field office. In general, I think we've improved customer service. People are happy. I'm pulling up my notes here. The average speed of answer dropped to 24 minutes, which was a decrease of almost 20 minutes in the same time last fiscal year. And even though the number of calls has increased, the calls answered by an agent has also increased 10%. So just using data that we already had and new technology with generative AI, we were able to make a difference for the general public.
Humanity and technology connect in this particular case. And I know, Eric, yours has some relationship to that idea as well. Would you mind walking us through the issue that you were trying to address?
Sure. Thanks, Cole. How well do you know your colleagues? We spend all day either physically sitting next to them or on boxes on screens next to one another. We wanted to explore in one of the offices I was leading, how can we improve the connections that we're missing or we could be making between and among one another? So we led an effort called Let's Connect, and it all started with just an idea. And the idea was, how do we improve connection among our employees? Do we understand what other offices and programs do? Do we understand the backgrounds and expertise or interests of our colleagues so we could better collaborate and achieve results? So what came out of, and we did this in a virtual forum. So I think the use of technology here in the story I'm about to talk about is not necessarily this program had this issue or this process, and we found technology to find a solution, but rather how we use technology through virtual sessions to lead change, organizational and culture change. So Let's Connect started with maybe once or twice a month, we get together and talk about an article, something tied to professional development, like how do I improve an elevator pitch or project management or process management, read an article, come to discuss. And we found that a lot of people, well, first it started with phones. We did it via like telephone bridges before this is actually the start of the pandemic. And we moved to Teams, and it was eye-opening. We saw that we had sometimes like over 100 or hundreds of people joining from our organization of about 400. There was definitely interest in connecting, and there was interest in these themes. And what started as a very top-down driven, all right, we're going to talk about these professional development areas, quickly started into, well, I have this background. I'm a yoga instructor. I could walk people through breathing exercises. Work gets stressful. This might be helpful. One person said, well, I actually know breathing exercises. I'm a scuba instructor. And we started making these connections among one another that people known each other for years, but had never made before. And what it ended up happening was this top-down initiative really became more of a, oh, well, I'm in this course that I really took and it was interesting. I want to share my experience about being on detail, about taking a PMP, a project management course. I want to talk about my experience in strategic planning. So we were able to tie both the cultural connections or the connections we're trying to make through culture change to also improve the organization. You know, one of the sessions that was most widely attended and most powerful was a story of 4 of our female employees talking about their journeys from GS1 to GS15, which for those of you not in the government, is like the very beginning of the pay scale of the government, all the way to the very top for the executive service. And it was through these types of experiences that were shared that we could see what are we doing, what type of organization do we want to be, and also understand each other a little bit better. I think as a result of this, we not just connected and started to change our culture, but we saw program improvements. We started thinking about our customers and stakeholders differently. For example, here at the State Department, you know, we operate globally. We realized we were doing a lot of our sessions, our briefings during Eastern Standard Time. So we started doing sessions early in the morning, in the middle of the day, and late in the evening to make sure that we were able to connect with our global constituency and our partners throughout our agencies so we could better support the department's mission. And across the 16 or so program areas in the office where this initiative started, we were able to see program results in improving plain writing, access to information, the capture of billions of records so we can find information in response to the public and other customers better. And as a result, in all of this, we actually found a way to leverage technology to be a little bit more human.
Awesome. Eric, one of the things, I mean, first of all, I don't know that I ever would have thought that the yoga and the scuba would immediately connect in such a way. And that's what's so exciting about these elements where you start to think about how do the members of our team create a culture, and how does our mission drive what that culture needs to do for us? And I know, Janice, a lot of what you worked on was this exact question of how to marry up maybe what could be seen as mutually exclusive cultural sort of aims. Could you talk us through that sort of starting point for y'all?
Absolutely. Thank you, Cole. And I just have to start by saying it's always fun but hard to follow Kara and Eric. As you noted, my story is about appreciating the cultural norms within an agency and what motivates and engages our staff in order to meet changing requirements. So by our nature, NSF is a highly collaborative environment. And really to ensure that we are funding cutting edge science and engineering across all disciplines, we rely on a cadre of program staff with deep connections across their fields of study. It's really an investigator-driven, bottom-up approach that's led to significant discoveries. Consider the MRI, one of the most widely used medical imaging technologies. It's rooted in decades of NSF-powered research. If you look across today's emerging technologies, they've all come about from those decades of NSF-funded research, and tomorrow's will be as well. And our nation's STEM workforce is heavily supported both directly and indirectly by NSF. But all of that can take many years. In fact, it can take upwards of 2 or more years to develop new programs from the point when we're soliciting proposals, reviewing them, and making awards. So with that in mind, think back to the COVID pandemic. NSF received $600 million from the American Rescue Plan, and emergency supplemental funding of this magnitude was new to us as an agency. And we had to ensure that we achieved the impact the country needed as quickly as possible. Now, broad collaboration isn't a quick process, and we needed a top-down guidance structure to direct that rapid action. But we needed buy-in from our staff, and we needed the information that they had at the ready for different ways to best deploy these funds. So recognizing this, and we really needed a new process of decision-making. And so we facilitated discussions with colleagues across the agency to develop guiding principles for how we would spend the funding. We really focused on supporting groups of individuals and institutions that were most strongly affected by the pandemic. So for example, the pandemic exacerbated existing disparities and disproportionate impacts on women researchers. Who were disproportionately taking on duties associated with increased childcare or other family-related responsibilities. Underrepresented groups, we had programs that support these students and researchers that were disrupted because of the pandemic. And early career faculty, it's a critical point in careers when research productivity is very important to career building. So we really couldn't afford to lose all of these researchers from our STEM workforce. And we worked across the agency to be clear on our intent and be clear on what was driving it. We needed to facilitate more rapid action. So we effectively set parameters that helped all of our teams quickly prioritize their efforts. So within 4 months, we had $200 million out in the community. That was 1/3 of the funding. And by the 1-year mark, we had roughly 75% awarded, and the remaining followed shortly thereafter. So we blew through all of our established timelines, and we did it in a way that empowered our staff and in a way that our stakeholders and the staff could really see our impact. Our investments supported research and people across the country, and we worked within our culture and leveraged our strengths across the agency to best serve the American people.
Wonderful. So those are our 3 high-level overviews. And just to really touch on scale for a second, right? We're talking about over 400,000 calls and a reduction in time of nearly 50% to get to someone at SSA. In Eric's case, we're talking about a globally distributed workforce. How do we bring them all together to have a unified culture, regardless of the time zone they have to call in from? In Janice's case, one of the largest investments in emergency funds, $600 million that the agency ever received. How do we then sort of almost invert our command structure to say, we need to get this out quickly and rapidly and intentionally? Those are our big high-level overviews. And now I'd love to get into some of the nitty-gritty details of how the 3 of you actually pursued your solutions. So the very generic question is, how did you address this? And I know it's much more complicated than that. But if you could give us a few practical examples of, these are the steps I took, this is what I was seeing and what I wanted to do to sort of address that, I think it'd be very helpful. Eric, would you mind starting us off?
Absolutely. So within our organization, and again, it was a sub part of the State Department I'm talking about, the one that I was leading at the time, we saw that there was a real need for, or there was opportunities being missed. And I'll just give you a couple examples. Through direct reports or people I would talk to, I saw there maybe similar programs or similar ideas or talent or capabilities that are shared across different program areas. You mentioned silos before. Sometimes this work naturally gets siloed by mission and whatever you're working on. And it made us think about at a leadership team level, what opportunities are missing to connect the right people, to innovate, to get better results, or just to think about things a little bit differently. And so by seeking ways to make connections among employees in a more informal way than just saying, go out and talk to one another, but actually creating opportunities. And it was only once or twice a month. It was lunchtime optional sessions at first. It was, join us if you'd like. People would come, listen, some would participate, some wouldn't. And it didn't matter if they participated or not in terms of like typing something in a chat or speaking. They were there, they were present, they were listening, they were learning. And over time, I think one of the most exciting things we saw was that we came up with like, we should do this session. The ideas came, well, we want to do this together. We want to they just started emerging all around us. And we understand that this office is doing this and this office is doing that. And here's some ideas and maybe what we've learned from our previous experience. And that started to almost organically get collaboration across and breaking down those silos and new ideas and innovation.
Awesome. And Janice, is there anything in what Eric said that you might be able to pick up? I'm seeing you nodding a lot in the background here. So perhaps you could hop in next.
Absolutely. So it really comes down to recognizing that where we sit, we each have different perspectives and we have different ideas and strengths. And so really making sure that we are pulling in staff to share those perspectives and those ideas, and to try it. In our case, it really was, how can we do this? How can we facilitate that in a very rapid way? How can we make sure that we're providing those guardrails or those categories to say, here are the areas we know we want to invest in. Who's got things that fit into these areas? What are we missing? What other ways can we do this? What ideas do you have? And so we, over the course of a couple of weeks, we very rapidly identified all of those categories and areas. And by pulling together senior leaders and by pulling together folks, for example, in the budget professionals across the agency, they're the ones that needed to figure out how to allocate those funds down to those program officers. And so by bringing them all in to make sure we were clear on, this is what we mean when we say this category. And here's how we're going to try to leverage existing authorities or expand a few other options to make sure we are targeting and reaching those areas of greatest impact. And again, it really was building that circle large enough, but not too large that we couldn't facilitate discussions. It really was a fine line.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point, right? That's sort of like scale is great until it becomes unmanageable and people can't connect, kind of to pull back to Eric's as well, right? Like you need to make sure that you're still maintaining that level of sort of authentic relationship building. And so Kara, in your case, I know there's a lot of technology involved, but no technology gets implemented without people. And so I'm curious sort of how you went through getting folks to say yes to these pretty novel ideas.
Right. So I think one of the things that both Eric and Janice both touched on too, besides staff, was culture. And culture can be a problem, but I was in a situation where my partner really wanted to influence change as well. So he was providing top cover from his side. I was providing it from my side. Those challenges to get access to the data, he took care of those. And then on my side, I was like, I was leading data scientists who are incredibly smart and far smarter than I was. So I went to them with the idea like, hey, what about, just do some natural language processing to pull out keywords? And they're like, well, we could do that. Or you could give us the freedom to instead, use generative AI. And I was like, well, if that's what you guys think is best, I trust you. But I think what was the most interesting about how I execute it was really this staff used. The 4 data scientists, and just 4 who worked on this, were all very, very new to government. The most seasoned had less than 3 years at SSA. One had about 3 months when this project started. So just giving them the freedom to explore, to try things, to get to the point where things maybe weren't working as well, that just really worked out, I think, giving them the freedom to explore and the top cover to explore. And I think it also really connected them to the mission, where they realized that the work that they were doing was directly impacting the customers who need us most.
And Kara, you said one of my absolute favorite words when we talk about innovation, and that's challenges. And as we've discussed throughout Modern Government Leaders over the last 8 months, that's really where the rubber meets the road. Is there are going to be hurdles, there are going to be problems. And so in a space that is novel, in a space that might be uncertain, how you address challenges is maybe the most important part of success. And I'm wondering, Janice, if you could kick us off with a little discussion of what did you face as you tried to roll out this new way of working?
So I think to sum up, the biggest challenge was really kind of fear of missing out. That we had, obviously a lot of thought went into working with Congress and telling them, here are the types of things that we could do with emergency supplemental funding. And then once we received it, we had a huge, robust response from people who really wanted to be a part of this. And so helping the agency move from possibilities and options to decisions and narrow that field was really very challenging. Because again, we're a group that loves evidence. We love driving our decisions with community input. And so we had some of that, and there was still a fear of what might we be missing out on. And so helping to, just accept that as a risk and identify that we have these other opportunities at the ready, we need to deploy now. And so it was really openly talking about what are we afraid of, what's holding us back. That really got us through that challenge.
I love that. And I love, right, that it's every challenge is also an opportunity, right? And you can approach them with fear, or you can approach them with sort of a fearless, reckless boldness that says, yes, things will go wrong as we move through this, but that's okay. And Kara, I know in your case, there's this kind of interesting divide, right? You had a teammate on the data science side handling those challenges. You had you on your side. So there's also maybe I'd love your whole answer here, but there's also kind of a second question inside, which is how did the two of you coordinate the priority of those types of challenges?
I think we worked really well together to control the risks, in that we were taking these kind of tiny bites of the apple, where other people were looking at the broader customer service challenges, and we were looking at more of the very specific customer service challenges. And I think having that partner on the business side is what allowed us to overcome the challenges. I think, one of the risks is always, how long is that going to take while we try to figure out what the root cause is? We're very good at putting out the fires, but not necessarily fireproofing the house. And my counterpart is what, he kind of kept people calm and a little bit away from, just gave us a little bit of space to work, I think, so that we could say, hey, this is really what the root cause is, instead of just guessing, but actually using the data to get to that root cause. If that makes sense.
Absolutely. And I love that idea, right? That it's sometimes the whole job, the whole challenge is just everybody take a deep breath and let's see what the next step can be together. Nobody go herring off on your own in a panic. Eric, would you mind rounding us out on this with what those challenges were for you in this very sort of wide lens that you were putting on culture change at State?
Sure, and I can relate to a lot of the points Janice and Kara already raised about the fear of missing out, and having the right kind of evidence or data or information to figure out what are we trying to do. And so in terms of like the challenges with this initiative, we had goals performance each year organizationally, and we had individual performance employee goals to say, here's what results should look like. It was, how do we amplify those results? How do we get from like maybe something like we did this to like we did the best possible thing, or something new and truly like unprecedented and something that hadn't been done before. And part of it was ideas and figuring out and getting feedback and connection. And I guess just 2 points I'd make. One would be what are people afraid of? And sometimes people are afraid to share ideas, or, oh, I can't reach out to that person, or I can't do it. And they can. And sometimes it takes like a private, like, reach out, share that idea. No, really. We created anonymous feedback sites. We created a whole bunch of other avenues as a result of this to try to get people to share their perspectives. So people felt seen and heard, which is pretty important. And the other thing, as we're talking about, how do you address the challenge? It's making sure you're asking questions and figuring out what question or challenge am I trying to address. And in this case here, it was very clear. Again, we had objectives and goals for the organization. Here's what we're supposed to do each year. We were more trying to get at how do we build a workplace culture, especially in a hybrid work environment or some people on site, some are remote, and then changes all along the way. We were trying to challenge the whole notion of, well, it's really a challenge to work remotely or virtually or on online platforms, which we found really wasn't the case in some of our program areas. In fact, it created more opportunity where my former chief of staff would say to me, well, in previous assignments, there's no way she would have been able to engage with the large group of people that we were engaging with, let alone the same senior audience that now technology has allowed us to do.
Yeah, and this idea of fear, in modern government leaders throughout, we've had two concepts come up relatively frequently, which is the fear of failure and the trauma of trying, which I don't know who coined trauma of trying on the first day, but it stuck with me in a big way all the way through. And I think it's really interesting to hear about how addressing those things at a base level frees people to do their best work, right? I mean, Kara, you alluded to this with the, yeah, we could do some NLP, but if you could free us up and give us this top cover, we could try something new, and we might get better results. And I think that's a really exciting and important piece of what it means to be an executive leader for innovative programs, right? Is to say, yes, I'm there for you, and we can make this better together. And I want to move to what that better looks like. And so I know each of you touched on a few of these impacts in your sort of overviews, but could you just drill down a little bit on what really came out of the work that you were doing? How might people feel the impact of what you've done here? And Kara, I said your name last, so we'll go straight to you. Would you mind kicking us off?
Sure. So I want to talk a little bit about the impact on the people first, internal to the organization. I think that the four who worked closely on this, just the invigoration that they had, where they knew that they had the freedom to try new things and that we could ask follow-up questions and they could dig into that large language model deeper and deeper. I think that really helped, but that it just made an impact on them as employees where they're excited about the work that they're doing. And I think that's so important, especially with our younger new hires. They're excited to do government service and be a part of the organization, but we need to keep that excitement going. And this really helped, I think, with that. This also gave us a very real and very tangible, significant example of where we use data to solve a problem. We talk a lot about data-driven decision-making, but then we're not necessarily the best at putting that into practice. And this was a time where that's what we did. We used data, we made decisions, it had a real impact to the public, where we're saving phone calls so that we can answer faster and we are getting more first call resolution. And that is really leading to a higher customer satisfaction. And Social Security hits people where they're at their most vulnerable. So it's really important that we're doing these things to better serve them. And then I would say finally, it just exposed the ability to use Gen AI to help us make some better decisions. And it kind of demystified that Gen AI doesn't need to be scary. It's not ChatGPT giving these rogue answers. It's really just the power of getting to the heart of our data faster. And one of the things Social Security has done, a new commissioner started in late December. So Commissioner O'Malley implemented Security Stat, which is every 2 weeks, there's relentless follow-up where people come, they brief on our biggest challenges and they show the difference that they've made in the last 2 weeks. And it's those little changes over the last in 2-week increments that's really driving Social Security forward to solve problems and serve the public better. And each security stat on the 800 number, another question gets asked where the team goes back to Gen AI and uses the data to massage, to come up with different answers, to see what other problems they can solve. And by having all of that data in our large language model, we're able to get to those answers every 2 weeks, which we never would have been able to do before.
Awesome. And just as a data scientist myself, Kara, I do just want to uplift. I love that you mentioned, right, generative AI, not just as a chat tool, right, but as something beneath that, the uses that it can have that are internal, with no impact directly on people is so important to be noting, and how you're using humans in that loop to make sure that what comes out is always what you want, what is going to serve the mission. Speaking of serving mission, I saw a lot of nodding, Eric, during both internal impact on staff and data-driven decision-making. I have a feeling that you have some things to say about these. Could I send it your way next?
Sure. Where to begin? I guess we'll start with impact. On the impact of the efforts and initiatives, we didn't send out surveys like, are these things, how's it going? And so in terms of data, it was more of a qualitative result. We saw people engaging more and asking questions, and not being afraid to say, I don't really understand data-driven decision making, or tell me more about data. And there's a lot about analytics and AI. It helped us identify and understand where we need to seek out professional development opportunities for employees, or have, or direct employees to some of the resources we have here at the State Department or at other agencies, or just are available for training and things like AI, data-driven decision making, and so forth. Because we use these terms, and became like, well, so it was because we changed culture. People are asked questions. Well, I don't really understand what this is. I was like, great. I'm glad you told us, because we would start talking and moving and advancing efforts and not be on the same page, and that wouldn't be a good place to be. So in terms of kind of combining impact and data-driven decision making, I think it's a good example where by developing a culture where people felt empowered to ask questions, and just also not just ask questions, but to work with one another, to collaborate and to make connections that they hadn't made before. We were able to see, I think, a better workplace. And I can just give you a couple of anecdotes without being too specific, where people would privately come to me and tell me that they appreciated this effort, or they feel like they have a better understanding now of what an office does, or how they could contribute. And in one specific example, from discussions, we had new initiatives launched. Like, we had a whole customer experience focus group that was created, that started looking across lines of business, and it wasn't driven by management. It was driven by the employees saying, here are like 20 lines of business we think from our perspectives could be improved or changed, and it's a great, go with it. And then they shared those results with management. So it's that type of innovation. And then from that, the impact then led to data, context, information. Here are concrete examples of recommendations and actual ways we could make and implement changes in real time.
Yeah, I mean, you can't get data if you don't try things, right? So we talk about data-driven decision making, but decisions must be made first that create the opportunity for data. And Janice, I saw you furiously scribbling some notes, and I'm wondering if you could share them with us. I'm excited about them.
Absolutely. I hope I live up to your expectations on these, but
you always have.
I think across the board, we all saw a positive impact on our staff and how we're engaging with them. And it's no surprise that it's a common theme. All of our agencies are mission driven. Our organizations are full of people who chose to be in the public service. And so being able to see our impact, and to see it so rapidly, particularly for NSF, a place where, as I mentioned before, sometimes it takes decades to actually then be able to go back and trace the lineage of today's discoveries were built upon decades of NSF funded research. So to see our impact in much more fast, rapid turnaround was fantastic. And certainly to receive the gratitude from the research community was very renewing and empowering for our staff. It also provided NSF an opportunity to really demonstrate our relevance and our ability to responsibly deploy resources to meet societal challenges. And so it's put us even more at the forefront of discussions. And we see an awful lot of different bills in Congress now, from CHIPS and Science Act, to try to make sure that we are addressing the national gap in semiconductors, and the need for increased research and workforce there, to we're looking now at, there's a number of bills in Congress on AI and how we can, NSF can be a lead partner in ensuring that we are deploying AI responsibly, and we continue to evolve the research and technology there. So all in all, it left our agency feeling great about how we contribute, and because we could see those impacts.
And the focus today really has felt in many, many ways. I mean, we've touched a lot of things, but it's felt mostly on other teammates, right? Folks that you've helped empower, folks that you've worked with, folks who've contributed to this work, and how to sort of get all hands on deck and this kind of almost bottom up percolation of opportunity, right? It's saying every mind, every person at this mission driven organization wants to deliver. And so how do we harness all of that ability and all of that creativity? And that's kind of, frankly, the whole purpose of modern government leaders was then to spread those ideas. And so I wonder if each of you could share one lesson from your experience implementing these programs, going through these processes, one lesson that you would want to share with anyone watching who wants to do this kind of work, who sees something and thinks, wow, we're doing a lot of great work, and I see an opportunity for us to focus it or do it better or something new. Eric, would you mind maybe kicking us off with a lesson from your experience?
I think the biggest lesson is how you spend your time really matters, and spending time on making connections among people is critical for a senior leader. When people ask me what my job is, and Cole and Kara and Janice, you've heard me say this, like, my job is people and results. I usually, depending on the audience, but people's usually the first answer. My job is people, and in working with people, in empowering people and getting results, I found that how you spend your time really is important. And through this initiative, through Let's Connect, there were times where, when we first started, it was me, my chief of staff, facilitating discussions, and sometimes it was crickets. And I remember some conversations like, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore. This probably isn't going to lead to anything, and maybe this isn't a great use of time. And ultimately we came out on, no, we're going to keep going, and it grew bigger and endured over years. And so how you spend your time really matters. And in that, it was nice over time. I would attend, my chief of staff would attend. She ultimately ended up leading a lot of the efforts over time or facilitating them. We would just go and listen, and people knew we were there, and people knew we were listening, and not listening like, oh, they're listening, that type of thing, but more like we were listening because we were interested, and we were trying to connect and understand better, what opportunities were out there, or sometimes just the topics were interesting and wanted to learn more.
Absolutely. Janice, I'm no transition. I'm just popping it straight over.
Absolutely.
What's one lesson you share?
So kind of along the same lines around relationships really matter. You're recognizing that the view from where you sit is just one view, and that you really need to broaden your perspective, broaden the inputs you receive, and do that through the relationships that you cultivate and create. Build those coalitions so that you have all the right voices coming in. The power of many can achieve more than just one. And so again, recognizing that I think the most empowering leadership models are those where you're actually leveraging all of those relationships and ideas and perspectives to rapidly innovate, to drive those options. And as we've said before, not just stop with one, right? Creating a culture where you can do this differently next time. You can learn those lessons from the first deployment and try it again.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that sense of iteration, right? Which I'm sure we're about to get a little bit more into. But first, Kara, a lesson from your experience there.
So you said one, but I'm not sticking to that. I'm going to give you two. Just to echo Janice and Eric, empower your employees. That's the key, right? Giving them the top cover to explore, to make a difference. And then I just can't not say this from my former role as overseeing the chief data officer function. Understanding your data is so important. And if you understand your data and you know what problem you're trying to solve, AI is such a powerful tool. So people and data coming together with technology, that's how you win.
And both of them, really, it's about understanding first before you act, right? You can't just command and control everybody to be like all hands on deck, right? That doesn't always work out super well. It's about inviting them in the same way that you have to understand that data before you can really take action on it. I love that. So we're going to transition a little bit now towards our more sort of like generalizable themes, universal ideas and truths about what it takes to innovate in the sort of senior levels of the federal government. And I think one thing that we talked about a lot in MGL and that I've heard from other corners of this conversation is oftentimes the hardest thing to do is start. And so I'm curious if you could talk to us a little bit about how you frame getting started. When you're looking at a problem and it's just a wide open field, and someone has told you, carve us a path, how do you take those first steps? What are the most important things to sort of get under your belt? And I'm seeing some nodding from Janice, so I'm going to send it over to Janice. Excellent.
Absolutely. So one of the things I've recognized about myself is I'm someone who really likes to talk things through. And so for me, it really is, who do I need on the team? Who do I need in the room to really figure out what are those critical first steps? Who needs to be involved and who has that perspective that needs to be heard to help shape, how we address the issue?
Awesome. Kara, do you have a thought about how you sort of get this going?
Is it okay to say find someone smarter than me to do it? No, but it really, to piggyback on Janice, it really is about finding the right people to help you solve that problem, and people with the appetite, those hungry people, those are the ones you want on your team.
I love that. I love that idea of appetite, right? And identifying who is it here that really wants to take this next step with me? Because when you get one, then you get two, then you get four. I love that idea. I mean, hey, democracy is awesome. I think we can all agree. Eric, do you have a thought here about how you sort of get your brain turning around questions like this?
Yeah, I think I'll build off the other two responses here from Janice and Kara. It's finding the right people, but not necessarily narrowing what you're doing to just, oh, well, this person does this, therefore it has to be that person or that group. It could be a professional development opportunity, or it could be someone's. You find in a discussion, just like when you're having on just could be a formal meeting, or it could be just a side conversation. Someone lights up or ignites when they talk about a specific theme or topic, and thinking about doing something. What do you think? And they might just have been passionate in that moment, or maybe this is something that they actually want to explore, or they have background or expertise in an area. So I think it's finding the right people, but not necessarily being bound by, oh, well, this unit or this section does this specific thing, so we're only going to go to them. But seeking out also those opportunities for growth and development among your employees in the organization, and sometimes they're right there in front of you, and sometimes if you don't know, ask, put it out there. I mean, I think one of the things I find is if I'm spending too much time on an issue or a challenge, or that means I'm probably not delegating well or haven't engaged everyone around me. So how do we really get, one mind doesn't have to solve a problem. We have a lot of people who are very smart, motivated, passionate. Let's tap into that knowledge base and use it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, a concept that's come up a few times in our conversations has been that there may be a start to innovation, but there's really no end, or else you've kind of defeated the purpose of the idea at the outset, right? And something that is unique about this group within our cohort is that all three of you have changed seats or organizations since you worked on the program that you've described. And so I wonder if you could talk to us a little bit about how you carry that forward from organizational context to organizational context, or from authority level to authority level, what it means to sort of maintain innovation and sustain it over time throughout your career. And maybe I will go to Eric to start us off on this. How do you feel about this one?
Well, this is my third role this year, so yes, I'm happy to. I don't know if this is about me necessarily, but I've been very fortunate to have three outstanding positions this year at the department, and I think appreciating one size doesn't fit all is really important. And so when you go to a different organization, even within an institution like the State Department, understanding what is the culture, what's the mission, how do we, what are we working on, where do people need support, asking questions, and also knowing that you're always going to be dealing with imperfect evidence, imperfect information. So understand with what you have, ask like in an organizational level, what are we doing? What does success look like? What do people say they need? What do our customers think, our stakeholders? And then leveraging those lessons from past experiences to see, are we being mindful of what others think, and what areas do we have for development, either institutionally, organizationally, and individually. So those are kind of the things that come to mind.
I love that. Yeah. And I will say, having been there the entire year that you were switching these three positions, I don't think it says anything bad about you that you've made these particular moves. They're all quite impressive. So I think congratulations are in order, if anything.
Thank you.
Kara, I know you also just made a pretty big move recently, and I wonder if you could speak to how this has carried over into your new work.
So I think from mission perspective, SSA and NASA's missions probably couldn't be more different. One's about like reaching people at their most vulnerable and helping them, and the other is really about space exploration and how we can kind of learn as humanity from what's beyond Earth. So super different, but what I've found is that different missions, but a lot of the same problems where we have to work together to build a really effective team. Without the team, without that camaraderie, it's hard to solve the problems. So one of the things I've really been focused on in my 2.5 months here at NASA is getting to know the team, getting to understand the culture, and figuring out what roadblocks my team needs me to remove so that they can continue to solve the problems that need to be solved.
Yeah, that removing of roadblocks, I think is part of the top cover element that you all have discussed and that we've discussed as a group over the last 8 months, is this idea that a lot of times leadership is just about being a plow and making sure that what comes after you can drive safely through the mountain passes, as it were. Janice, can I kick it over to you on how you've been doing this sort of through chairs?
Absolutely. So I think from the outside, my shift, I went from the deputy office head to the office head. So I stepped into the role, and it seems like it's pretty small, right? One would think for 4 years, I worked with an outstanding leader and just needed to step in and kind of continue what she was doing. But within the first few weeks, we had some very significant changes hit our organization, and it became very clear to me that that shift from one seat to the next was much more significant. And what I really needed to make sure I was doing was identifying how I needed to lead my team differently than I did in my other seat. I had a different peer group, and how could I be working with them? How could I make sure that I was identifying the things that only I could do where I was sitting, and delegating everything else, empowering everything else, and making sure I was sharing enough information so that where my team members could feel fully empowered and enabled to move and continue the work, because one single person can't do it. So it really was, for me, it took me a little while to figure it out, but once I got there, I realized it really is the seat you sit in really does matter, and how you leverage those relationships from your level in the organization, and how you create the space for your team to access information and access other individuals is really a key piece of leadership.
Yeah, and it's interesting in each of these, and you can all vigorously shake your heads or just start yelling if you disagree with me. But something that I heard there is that there is kind of a vulnerability when you step into a new place, a vulnerability where you are now isolated, maybe too strong of a word, but you're in a context where you're like, I, the individual, need to figure this out first before you sort of have that moment of like, oh no, wait, delegate and empower, delegate and empower. I am still part of a team, even though I'm in a new place. Great. I'm seeing nods, so I didn't say anything ridiculous. I love that. I'm wondering, when it comes to this question of vulnerability, and not for you necessarily personally, but for the survival of innovative programs or processes, what are the most critical things to set up when you are in the development and execution phase to ensure that those programs survive, let's say beyond your attention, right? Because you're going to get moved on to do something else. But something that's really strong and sustaining is what we need. We can't just be standing up programs and watching them fall over all the time, right? And so I'm curious if one of you wouldn't mind grabbing the microphone on what you think is most critical to ensuring the survival of an innovative program.
I can take that one if you want, Cole.
Absolutely.
Just because I still hear about how this building on the Gen AI work is successful. So I think it's about excitement. It's about exciting the people who are doing the work. It's about exciting the executives who need to support the work. And it's about exciting the people who weren't necessarily going to be involved, to say, hey, they did that over there, maybe we could do something similar. And just building on that excitement and showing that tie back to solving problems is what has really made this program sustainable at SSA.
And that really resonates, because I remember when you first sent me this idea, I mean, really, when you first sent in your desire to be in the program, this was the example that you provided. I was very excited. I thought it was extremely cool. And I'm so glad that I got to learn more about it. Eric, you noted in the chat that you're interested in going next. What do you have to share here?
Just a couple things come to mind. Understanding like what an organization does, and not necessarily, and knowing when to keep things going fast, or maybe when to maybe slow things down a little bit, just to better understand or reposition or regroup or ask some questions. So I think you can't slow down everything, because then you just find yourself behind. But understanding where an organization's at, where it's going, and I think one part of the question was like, how do you ensure survival of these practices? Well, I think it really comes down to making sure employees have the right skills for a modern workplace. You know, we have to be resilient, agile, you know, kind of like all right, we're going to do these 5 things in a specific way is just not going to work. And a lot of instances that I've seen now across a couple different positions and program areas that are very distinct from one another. So what do we have the right skills, and how do we make sure we, you know, have training opportunities and discussions for, you know, these are the things we're seeing in the work all of our employees need to have, not just one office, one person. So having those skills, and I just make one other point, not all programs and processes need to survive. I think there's actually important piece of evaluation that needs to occur, and really look at, like, is something doing what it's supposed to do? And some things, you know, are required or mandated to exist for, you know, in perpetuity, but some don't. And so, especially when there are increased demands, understanding what increased demands and finite resources, what are we doing? What's going well? And then where do you need to focus your time and energy in working with others? And innovation goes, at least for me, from not coming up with the solutions, but thinking about creatively how to empower programs, offices, people to do what they need to do. And I think that's a big shift too in thinking.
Yeah, and there's that concept of iteration again, right? That's coming back up here. And also thinking back to that idea of the fear of failure, what you're really describing is that when things, quote unquote, don't work out, it's not necessarily a failure, it's an experiment. And it's knowing that you have to measure what you try, see if it works. Don't keep investing in things that are broken, and try something again, try something new. This sounds scientific. And I wonder, Janice, if from the NSF, you might be able to share with us a little bit of how you ensure the survival of these programs when they pass the test.
Absolutely. Well, so at NSF, we also fund an awful lot of research around behavioral economics. So that it's not just the technology pieces, but certainly part of that is you really need to understand what is driving your organizational culture and different ways that you reinforce that, and work within that, or be very clear and specific in your intent to do something that might be contrary to that. What is the why? If you're drawing your circle big enough and on the why and how this is going to affect all of us, or again, you know, leverage that mission-driven workforce that you have to help them see the connections. That's really how you create sustainable change, is to help them understand, to see the why, and build that framework and reinforce it with how you're, you know, where you're giving awards and employee recognition. Are you rewarding the right behavior? How are you publicly talking about this, and how are you using your stories to amplify your agency mission and platform? So it's all of the above. It takes more than just, you know, a single thing of scaffolding. It requires an awful lot of care and feeding and attention to what are the forces for and against these changes, and how are we mitigating those forces that might be holding us back, and how are we amplifying those forces that really are driving us to where we need to be and we can excel.
And you hit one of my absolute favorite elements there, which is storytelling, right? Which is how do we make sure that what is being done is being communicated in a way that people really understand the impact that it can have, and the difficult work that goes into it and everything along the way, because only through that level of understanding can it be replicated, can it be built upon. You know, we've talked a lot actually in MGL about sometimes old things exist because they should. Don't just tear something down before you understand why it was built in that way, right? Don't change things just for the sake of doing it. And so I really love that focus on that sort of holistic sense of how is this all sort of playing in the context? I just have one last question here. This has been extremely rich. I'm really grateful to all of you. But I'm curious, right? You're sitting here as folks who have done some pretty amazing things in your roles, but nobody starts at the end. And I wonder if you could describe just a little bit of how you've evolved as innovators. You know, maybe we time bound it and we say over the last year or two, things that you've taken into your toolkit that you didn't have before and that have become a focus for you. And I know I'm kind of springing this one on you. So if anybody has an answer ready, I'm happy to send it your way.
I can jump in, and I don't know that it's necessarily been something that's evolved in the last year, but if I look at the trend line of my career, learning that I'm not the only one with a good idea, or oftentimes, as Kara put it, I'm not the smartest one in the room by any stretch of the imagination, but what I do have is the ability to bring people together or to help draw connections. And so just recognizing what's my superpower and what's my areas of weakness, and pulling in others that can help with those, kind of cover those gaps, recognizing that I have blind spots, and that's okay as long as I'm recognizing them and I'm having others help me recognize them. So creating that culture or that environment where that's the norm and expected, to help cover those blind spots and make sure we're putting everything out on the table, is really what I've come to develop as really, this is how I feel most comfortable moving forward as a leader, is when I know I have people covering that for me.
I love that. I love that. And it really does put that focus on, why do we have domain experts? For this exact reason, to listen to them, to use their expertise, to combine it with others in a cross-functional way. Kara, Eric, do either of you have a ready thought here?
I think I can build a little bit on what Janice said too. So we're talking about our successes and like our biggest successes of late, but for every success we have, I personally have a ton of failures. So just the innovative leader thing, I've had to become humble. There's a lot of humility in this, accepting that not all ideas are going to be well received. Maybe the timing's off. Maybe the idea really doesn't solve the problem you thought it was going to solve. But being humble and understanding that failure is totally a part of this process, I think has made me just a better leader, and reminds me that it's okay to try again, and think outside of the box, because not every time is going to be this great success.
For sure. For sure. It is interesting, handling those moments gracefully can be the entire difference between evolving to the next moment or staying exactly as you are. You know, I mean, Eric, obviously you're good at literally everything. So I can't imagine there's too much of an answer here, but what do you got?
Well, I'm not. I could definitely give you a list of people who would give you other perspectives here. So, Karen, to your point, that people see the successes and when things are going very well, and they tend to focus on that. We don't pay a lot of attention to maybe like lessons learned from things that didn't go so well, with those risks and failures. The failures is a harsh word too. Like if something doesn't work, it's like, all right, then just moving on too, like not dwelling on it. And these are important things. But to go to the innovation question, one of the things I guess I've really had to learn and work on is understanding I might have an idea or something I really think is important and want to move forward, but either the institution or the workforce, the team here wants to go on a different one. And so we have to put that aside. And that being like something maybe I'd want to do, or a team of us would want to do at a more senior level, and figure out like, how do we support what we're doing right now and use our innovation and talents to support those efforts underway. And I think that's probably one of the biggest shifts and change. Like sometimes a good idea will take off and things will happen, you'll get a result. But sometimes it's also just kind of the self-awareness of this is not the time to launch something, even if I really feel strongly about it. And that's tough. I mean, but it's also I find it equally rewarding to see innovation, new ideas, and things that I wouldn't have had any concept or understanding of moving forward, and we could do it in a whole different way. And that's a way of learning through innovation from others.
Yeah, I mean, so self-awareness, humility, and grace, it seems like, are maybe three words that percolate to the top here. And I appreciate that about all of you. Each of those things I've seen over the last 8 months. And I'm really glad that we've had the chance to connect and the chance to share these stories of what it looks like to really change the way that services can be delivered and change the way that culture can be managed within the federal government. It has such an enormous impact on our country writ large. So I just really want to thank the three of you again for your dedication to this program, for the stories that you shared today, and frankly, for just being lovely people to spend this time with and develop these ideas with. For those of you in the audience, if you are interested in learning more about how all of this comes together, in a month or so, I'm not going to give an exact date, we will be releasing all 4 of the Innovators Hour conversations in a library. I'll be writing a little summary of some of the key takeaways. We'll be providing some links to review some of the materials that the cohort have created as part of these programs and processes. So that's an email that the 3 of you can expect to get from me. But for those of you watching, thank you so much for joining us. Again, this is Cole with the Partnership for Public Service, and a final thank you to our participants as we sign off Modern Government Leaders this year. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Absolutely.